I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. I loved the job and would have stayed longer, but administration sucked. That's another story though. Anyway, I worked the night shift and had some creepy stuff happen that just couldn't be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in infirmary. Okay, I was there maybe a month, not a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who has spent time at any jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it's a very distinctive, definitive, loud sound. So to get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by central control. I'm sitting at my desk and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it, and it opens about halfway and then just slammed shut. Now, in my office, there is a huge glass window so that nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. So when the door slammed, I thought it was just the officers messing around, and I jumped up and went to the window, and no one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I had just woken him from sound sleep, and I said, "Ha ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about, and I knew this officer, and I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank because, frankly, he was kind of a jerk with absolutely no sense of humor. So I thought it was some mechanical glitch. I sat down and everything just changed. It felt colder, and I felt as if I were being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I took my stethoscope from around my neck and put it on the desk and left my office to go into the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few, talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the desk, on the side underneath, and it wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on shift with the key. Now I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere and I can't find it. Now in my office there is a large closet that holds all supplies. This is also locked, with the key being on the set of keys that I carry. Later in the shift, I needed to go into the closet to get something. I really don't remember what. And sitting in the middle of the floor is my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicks again, opens halfway and slams shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared shitless, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after, so I go back in, and I swear the whole atmosphere felt lighter. It was warmer, and I just felt more comfortable. After my shift, the central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut, with not a single person near them or in the hallway. I wish I could say that was the last time that happened, or that I got comfortable with it. I did not, because each time it happened, it seemed that the door slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer, and almost felt like I was being stalked. Things that went missing were found in different parts in the jail. My pen case in the women's wing, my med sheets in solitary central controls room, my portable blood pressure in the kitchen. And each and every time something of mine would show up in some other part of the jail, the officers and I would look at the tapes and see no one. Remember I said I felt like I was being stalked? Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse that worked night shift. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had any doors click open or slam shut. Their stuff didn't disappear and then reappear elsewhere either. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down that this type of incident never ever occurred before. It got to the point for me that I started just not staying in my office. I just got all the stuff I needed for my shift and sat at the office desk. I did that until I left there to get another job, and I haven't had anything like that happen again since. Back when I was in high school, my friends and I loved exploring creepy places. A few of us had our driver's license, so on weekend nights we would gather a group of 6 to 10 people and go on an adventure. One summer, our favorite place to go was this abandoned movie theater on the west end of town. This place had probably closed down about 3 years before we started visiting it, and in that time it had become a run-down building. There were no trespassing signs on the front entrance, and each of the fire exits around the building coming from the theater rooms. The glass at the main entrance was all broken and had been boarded up. The front door was busted and didn't latch or lock, so people were able to get inside. We knew there had to be homeless people crashing in there, but we were young and dumb and felt invincible as a group. It was part of what made it scary. We would always wait until between 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. to get into places like this, because we didn't want anyone to see or hear us or report us to the cops. We all explored it together the first 2 times we went in. The screens and seats were all torn up inside each of the maybe 8 rooms. The bathroom mirrors were broken, and there was graffiti everywhere. We were fairly sure there were people hiding in there while we were inside, even if we never saw anyone the first 2 times we went in. There were a couple of shopping carts from a nearby Fred Meyer's inside, with cans and bottles in them and a few dirty blankets scattered around in different rooms. It looked lived in. After getting to know the layout of the place the first couple of trips, we made a game of it for the 3rd and final visit. This time, the 6 of us that went split into 3 groups of 2, and with our partner, the 2 of us that would enter the front together and spend a full 5 minutes inside while the other waited outside at our chosen exit in the back building. The first 2, Beck and Doug, both went in while we waited outside. About 7 minutes went by, and just as we were starting to worry that we should go in after them, they made it out the other side through the fire exit. Doug told us that they went upstairs into the office, and there was a sleeping bag there that hadn't been there on the previous visit, and as soon as they went up there and saw it, they tried to leave immediately. But they turned around and tried to leave through the wrong exit. They were paranoid that they were being followed out, so they just stood there watching their way, entered the theater room for a minute, make sure they didn't hear any noise, before finally worked up the nerve to run out the right exit in the room across the hallway. Both Doug and Beck wanted us to leave, but Jack and I weren't having any of that and insisted on going in. Brad and Drew, the other 2 of the group that were going to go in last, wanted to come with us. So the 4 of us went inside while Beck and Doug both waited at the exit. The first thing we all wanted to do when we got inside was go check out the upstairs office. Just as we started to make our way up the stairs, we all heard a loud banging sound. It was coming from the back of the theater. We all agreed it had to be Beck and Doug trying to scare us, so that we could come out and we could leave. We got upstairs and the pounding stopped. Doug was right. There was a sleeping bag rolled out on the ground with a few paper bags set up around it. Brad flashed a light in one of them and saw a syringe and something that looked like a vibrator. We were all pretty grossed out and had a little laugh about it. We looked around up there and didn't really notice anything else interesting, and we were staring back down the stairs when the pounding started again. We decided we should probably make our way to the exit. I hoped we hadn't been caught trespassing by the cops. We came out through the exit and immediately both Doug and Beck were talking over themselves to tell us that about a minute after we entered, a really tall, homeless-looking, creepy man with greasy hair walked right past them, heading for the entrance. Beck said hello as he passed, and the guy stopped, turned and kind of lunged a few inches towards him before stopping. One side of his face was really wrinkly. Beck thinks that he might have been a burn victim or something. The guy stared him down for a few seconds, and then without saying anything, turned and walked around the corner where we had gone inside. They started pounding on the door right after he was out of sight, to try and warn us there was a scary dude in there with us. We were in there for about 5 minutes with this guy, and never saw him. He had to have heard us and hid somewhere. We started to walk back to our car in the Fred Meyer's parking lot, about 100 yards away, and a car pulled into the parking lot and shined its headlights on us, before flashing its red and blues. The police officers had us all sit down in front of the spotlight in front of the car and asked us what we were doing. We told him we were going to head inside the movie theater, but a really scary tall guy walked in and we chickened out. He told us it was really dangerous to go into places like that, as there had been violence in that building before, and it'd be a shame if we were going to be hurt doing something stupid. He let us go when we drove off, and we saw him shining a light inside the front entrance. We took the nice police officer's advice and never went into places like that again. I never did find out what violence he was talking about. It could have just been a tactic to scare us out of coming back. But regardless, we stuck to graveyards and cemeteries after this. Better to be safe than sorry after all. 5 years ago, I worked as a CNA at an Eastern Tennessee nursing home. Not for me. I had a resident named Helen, who upon getting my hall assignment, was told by my hall partner that they all believed her to be possessed. Ha, right, whatever. First off, I'm not religious. Second of all, I've seen too many elderly folks acting crazy by the grace of Father Time. That's the Bible Belt for you. So I just smiled and nodded, because why be rude? Helen turned out to be one of the more difficult residents, to say the least. She was wheelchair-bound and could scoot herself up and down the hall, muttering to herself, and sometimes, without warning, she would attack someone close to her, be it a fellow resident, staff, or visitor, clawing, hitting, and kicking, until she was pulled off the bewildered person. She did have incredible strength when these attacks happened, and she would growl these deep, guttural growls the whole time. We ended up having to keep her isolated in a room alone, with her wheelchair locked to keep the other residents safe. A few months into the job, I switched to night shift on the same hall, because the shift differential was a little over $1 more on the hour. I was told by the night shift nurse that Helen was just as much a handful at night as she was during the day. One night, while I was walking down the hall to do my midnight vitals, I smelled the familiar stench of fecal matter when I stopped by Helen's room. I thought maybe evening shift left a dirty adult diaper in the trash can, as they sometimes do it if they're in a rush to get through their end-of-shift dry routine. The trash cans are right by the inside of the doors, so that the housekeepers can easily reach in and empty them. I stuck my head in the room, and by the light from the hall I could see the trash can was empty, but the stench was unmistakable, and very strong. I stepped into the room and paused. I could hear Helen's raspy, low muttering. It creeped me out more than usual because on night shift, there was only one CNA per hall. I was alone. The nurse was at the nurse's station. It was dark in there, and Helen was awake. Her bathroom was to the left of her door, so I reached in and turned the light on. I was horrified at what I saw when I stepped past the bathroom and came in view of Helen's bed. She lay there on her backside facing me with her bony hand. She was wiping her own feces on the wall, but there was red mixed with the brown. After calling the nurse, the two of us discovered she hadn't just played in the bowel movement she made in her adult diaper. She had dug it out of herself, ripping the thin, delicate anal tissue in the process, wiping the poop, bloody mixture all over the wall. She never made out like she felt any of it. We had to start restraining her through the night. Another night, a new charge nurse had gotten assigned to my hall. In the mornings before day shift started, the nurse had to give all morning meds. I warned her not to interact with Helen unless I was with her. "That little bitty old thing?" she asked. "She can't be more than 85 pounds soaking wet." 87.5, I said. "And it takes 5 CNAs to bathe her." She looked at me like she didn't believe me, but agreed to let me know before she medicated her. Right before I started my end of shift charting, the nurse told me she was ready to administer Helen's meds. I nodded, stood up, and followed her into Helen's room, where she still lay restrained. I went to get a pair of gloves from the dispenser, but they were empty. I turned to the nurse and said, "I'll run to the stockroom for a box of gloves. Don't touch her until I return." I saw the nurse's eyes roll as I exited the room. Coming back from the stockroom, I heard cries of help ringing down my hall. The CNA from the adjacent hall was already running towards the sound, and I followed. The source was the ever-doubting newbie nurse who had undone the wrist straps of the sweet old lady and was now being clawed at. She had a hand full of her hair from the back of her head and was digging her fingers into her throat, which were all scratched up and starting to bleed. Helen was screaming in a guttural rasp, "We hate you." It took me, the other CNA, and another nurse to pry Helen's fingers off my nurse and restrain her again. The nurse from the other hall was cleaning my nurse's wounds while I took down the incident report. She said through sobs that after I left, Helen spoke to her in a sweet voice, told her good morning and smiled at her. She asked if she wouldn't mind helping her go to the bathroom. Helen was incontinent and hadn't used a toilet in over a year. The nurse told her that of course she would and removed the wrist restraints, when Helen suddenly pounced. She cried harder, saying her voice, even the smell of her, completely changed. I charted the nurse had deep lacerations to her throat and was missing a patch of hair. Helen had ripped it from her skull. She quit that night. There were many other instances, and I became terrified of caring for that woman. The worst happened on my last night working at the nursing home. I was about to leave. I had already clocked out, but remembered I needed to tell the day shift CNAs about a resident having an out-of-facility doctor appointment, that one of them would need to have to ride with them. I spotted them down the hall and called out to them walking in their direction. I was passing Helen's room, did a double take and stopped dead in my tracks. Day shift had already gotten Helen up and in her wheelchair. It was in locked position in the middle of her room, but she'd somehow had gotten one of her hands free from the restraint and was chewing the index finger of said hand. It was all a blur. I screamed something. I ran into the room and the day shifter nurse ran with me. It took all of us to wrestle her finger out of her mouth. She was screaming in protest and growling the whole time, mouth of yellow and jagged teeth covered in blood and bits of flesh. Helen had chewed the meat off most of her right index finger. The doctor was called in, and he said he'd never seen anything like it, and she would need skin graft surgery. It was more than I could take. I walked out of the nursing home and never returned. I didn't give any notice either. I didn't even call. I remained traumatized by Helen and never worked as a CNA again. I was sitting outside my work having a smoke. 4 a.m. Not a soul in sight. A man came up to me, asked if I had a spare cigarette. I politely declined. Normally this just elicits some grumbling, then they amble off. Not this time. Buddy decided to dig in his heels. He had all his earthly belongings on his back, and a gigantic glass bottle of vodka that he started swinging around. He also had the kind of eyes that would give a lion tamer the heebie-jeebies. Not an ideal combination in someone who's getting up in your unarmed face. You better give me a smoke. No, dude. Sorry. I said give me a smoke. You don't know who you're dealing with. He starts to loom over me, getting a bit too far into my space bubble. I stood up, all 5'3" of me. The only things I had going for me were steel toe-cap boots and a really bitchy look. The man backed up a step and then came back even closer. He was directly in my way back to the door. He took my motion as a threat as he immediately ramped up his act. If you don't give me a cigarette, I'm gonna end you. No one will find you. Now look me in the eyes, woman. I'm looking at you in the eyes, I replied firmly, planting my feet and giving him my best graveyard shift stare. Anyone who's worked night shifts will know what that stare is. He kept insisting. I looked him in the eye, and I kept replying just as fast that I already was, and what was he gonna do about it? Don't try me. I'll drag you by your hair to the bushes, and then you'll see. Getting closer still and holding the vodka bottle up. This is when I started getting really loud. Get out of my face and back off. Get out of here now. In true predator fashion, he got all nervous at the sudden yelling, and while he kept threatening me with all sorts of heinous things, and was looking around quickly for any witnesses, this is when I knew I was in trouble if someone didn't come along. I cannot emphasize enough how creepy this guy was being. I've actually abbreviated most of what he said, but luckily my coworker finally heard the commotion and came barreling out, already on the phone to the police. The man started threatening her as well, then realized who she was on the phone with and quickly walked away, slurring more insults as he went. The police came and I gave a detailed description, but they never found him. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my coworker hadn't come out when she did. I lived in the suburbs of a small town in Italy until I was 19. Near my house there is a dirt road that leads into a small wood. I went to the woods with my friends, and a lot of the times when I was a kid would go there to play and explore. Before entering the woods on the side of the dirt road, there is an unfinished house, and going forward there is a country house built far from the road, accessible via a small path. I first saw the orb when I was 12, and I was going to the woods on my bike with my friends. We opted to stop and explore the unfinished house on the side of the road. So we went inside, but there was nothing interesting, just an empty house which we decided to leave. Before going out of the house, I noticed some stairs that were leading to the first floor. My friends were already on the road, ready to go, except for one of them that was still in the house with me. I asked him to wait for me, as I was going upstairs to see what was there. I was a little scared because the first floor was dark, but I decided to go there anyway. I took 2 steps and saw something on the last step. It was a new bouquet. It looked like someone had brought it the same day and dumped it there. At this point, I was very scared and unsure if I should move forward. I took 2 to 3 more steps, and I was able to see a room on the right. Inside the room, there was the orb, a small white orb with a light floating inside it. But it wasn't a normal LED light. That light wasn't propagating. It wasn't enlightening or anything. It was just contained in this small orb that was stationary. I ran downstairs and outside as soon as I saw it, and never mentioned it to my friends, fearing they wouldn't believe me. As time passed, I forgot about the event. But when I reached 15, I started smoking weed, so I usually went to the woods alone to smoke in peace. Nothing ever happened in the woods, so it didn't scare me, even though the house did. So every time I went to the woods, I ran when I was passing by the house, and then forget about it. But someday I decided to explore the country house. I was high and taking everything very lightly, so I went into the house from the front door. There was another creepy empty house. The windows were open and it wasn't even dark, but one room wasn't like the others. It's the room with the big doors that you can see on the side of the country house. The floors and the walls in the rooms were burnt and totally black. There was a gas tank on the floor with some gasoline still inside it, and on one wall there was a small opening leading to very little and a totally dark room. This little room, perhaps 5 by 1.5 meters, was also burnt, and on the ground there was a pair of children's shoes. Suddenly the fear comes in, but it was nothing compared to the one I felt when I looked outside. In the middle of the countryside between the country house and the abandoned one, there was the same small orb that I'd seen years before. And I've never run so fast in my life. Until a year ago when I was 18, I was hanging out a summer night with my 2 friends. We were bored and opted to go into the woods that night. I started to become very scared and my friends were making fun of me, but I wasn't afraid of the darkness. I was scared of the orb. We parked the car at the end of the paved road and decided to walk the rest of the way. We passed by the abandoned house, and it was there. It was the orb standing in the middle of the countryside. It was the first time I saw it at night, and it was different because it wasn't just a circular light. Behind the light, there was a silhouette of a child. I couldn't see the face or the rest of the body, just a thin white silhouette. And this time my friends saw it too, because we all started to run. I don't live there anymore. I got a high school degree, went to uni in a big city. But if I were there, I would take pictures to show you the house, the burnt room, the shoes, everything. I've had trouble sleeping since then, and the orb has perpetually haunted my dreams. When you work as a nurse, you see it all. You have to become accustomed to dealing with death, as it's very likely that it will happen on your watch, especially when you work in a care home like I do. I've had lots of people come and go, but one of the creepiest and most common things that happens is talking to relatives that have already passed when you're about to go. Such was the case with a dear friend of mine, Thomas. He had lost his wife many years ago. He was also semi-lucid at times, but for the most part just babbled. He had dementia. He had no family left. He and his wife had 3 children, but they had all died tragically and horribly during their lives. It pains me, but no parent should have to bury their children, especially not all three. He was very lonely, which is why I grew attached to him, because he was a kind and sweet old man. He'd tell me stories of his children, of his wife, and of how wonderful they all were. He even got teared up when he told me about how his children had met their end. They had all gotten very sick, and, well, they died. It was one of these nights when I was doing my rounds, when I just went into his room to wish him good night and told him that it was time for bed. He gave me a smile and said, "I don't think I'm going to sleep tonight." I asked him what he meant. I looked at my watch and it was already 10:30, which was plenty late for Thomas, who usually slept around 9. He gave me another smile. "I'm going to make my exit now. The curtain has fallen." He was a theatre actor, you see, and liked using this terminology a lot. We got a hoot out of it, me and the other nurses. I gave him a confused look. "What do you mean you're on your way out?" "My kids are here, and my wife. They're here to pick me up. I'm going to take the bus now." I gave him another confused look. What the hell was he talking about? And then it all clicked. He was seeing the ghosts of his family. He gave me another smile when he saw my face dawn with comprehension. "That's right, girlie. It's time for me to go. You scoot along now. I hope I don't see you anytime soon." And he gave a chuckle. I gave a little smile in response. "You silly man," I thought. Then I walked out the room, gave him a little pat on the shoulder, and said I'd be back in half an hour and expected him to be asleep. Half-hour later, I'm still finishing up some paperwork and push it for 45 minutes before I go check up on him. When I do, I see he's soundly asleep, but just think I better nip in to check on him to make sure he's okay. I quietly open the door and go and see if he's still breathing, and he's gone. Just like he said his family was here. As you can imagine, I was pretty creeped out. And just as I was about to leave the room to do what we need to do when someone passes away, do I hear a whisper behind my ear, "Thanks for everything, girlie." I turn around, thinking that he must still be alive, with a huge surge of relief washing over me. When I turn around, he's still dead, on the bed, and hasn't moved. I'm pretty sure he just wanted to wish me one final goodbye, but that sent chills up my spine for the rest of my shift, and left me with a dawning sense of uncomfortableness. It leaves me wondering, though, the mystery of the afterlife, if there even is one, or if that was just his brain playing tricks on him. But why does it happen to so many people? I guess I'll never know, but I suppose one day I'm bound to find out. I worked the night shift at a local McDonald's. I had to fill in for my friend Kiara, who called in sick. This night was probably one of the most terrifying nights I have ever worked. It was dead around 11 p.m, as I was asked by the manager to sweep the floors until a customer came in. One customer came in, and he looked a bit rough. He had a long, rusty beard, glasses, sandals, and just clothes that had stains on them. I go over to the register and say, "Hello, can I get you anything?" "Yeah, I'll have a large coffee, please." I take his order and give him his coffee and tell him, "Have a wonderful night, sir." He smiles. I resume sweeping the floor again as I see this man sitting a bit close to where I could be sweeping, which is usually under the tables and just around the floors. When I reached his table, he says, "You're very beautiful." "Thank you so much," I say, with a smile. "Can I give you a ride home when you get off work?" "Oh, no thank you, I have a ride home." He becomes the opposite of the nice man that I took the order from, to just pure rude. "What's your schedule?" "I'm not allowed to give out that information, sorry." He takes his coffee and goes back outside. The next night, after that, Kiara and I worked together, and my other guy friend Jack too. I told Kiara about the guy from the night before, and she gave me a weird facial expression. Jack comes over and says, "Monica, is everything okay?" I tell him about the guy from the night before, and he gave me a look of terror. What he said sent chills running down my spine. "The man called the restaurant earlier and asked about you." My blood ran cold as I saw the same man walk back in. Kiara's face went pale and Jack's stomach dropped. My stomach turned in knots and I say, "Hello, can I get you anything tonight?" "No, but can I take you home?" Jack steps out and says, "No, she ain't going anywhere with you. Get out before I call the cops." The manager got pissed off at Jack for leaving his position at the drive-thru window while Kiara was frying burgers, and Jack agreed to switch positions with me until the morning crew came in. The manager asked me to take the trash outside. I nervously said okay. Jack, on the other hand, was furious that the manager asked me to do it. Jack was nice enough to do it for me. I stayed by inside, and Jack comes in and pulls me into the janitor's closet and says, "That guy was waiting for you in his truck with 5 other big guys in there." I felt sick to my stomach when he said that. Jack informs the manager, and, like the asshole that she was, says, "He's not gonna hurt anyone. He's harmless. Get back to work." The next morning, me and Jack worked together, and my co-worker Taylor informs me that the man has come back, and told him my schedule and that he will wait for me to come back today. I was sick of it, until I saw him come in. Jack, being the good friend that he was, told him to get out of the restaurant and never return, or else he'd call the cops. Jack lost his job because of this, but to me he was just looking out for me. I cried when Jack lost his job, because I knew Kira would be working alone without anyone else to protect us, but I never saw the man again after that. I quit my job at McDonald's, and so did Kiara. Me, Jack and Kiara now live in the same apartment building and work at a grocery store. I don't know what could have happened to me if I took out the trash that night, and not Jack. I'm just happy I never saw that creep again. I live in a pretty small and rural town, and most of the neighborhoods are somewhat in the woods. My high school soccer team was having an end-of-the-season party at one of the players' houses in one of these wooded neighborhoods. Towards the end of the night, someone mentioned a house towards the end of the road past a curve, somewhat cut off by woods, that a doctor owned but was never there, leaving it somewhat abandoned. We all thought it would be a good idea to check it out. About 8 or 9 of us walked over there in the pitch darkness, and the house had some small lights, but no one was home. We go to the backyard where there was just a pool and started looking around. Behind the backyard there's only woods, and a little bit of woods on the side as well. It's a big property, so we split up in pairs of 2 or 3, with 2 groups walking around the house and one trying to get inside and on the roof. They weren't that smart. They couldn't get inside or on the roof, so we just sat in the backyard talking about random stuff and joking around, when I noticed a sound that was reminiscent of a clacking sound on the roof. It started sounding like someone was walking back and forth on the roof, and I looked up thinking that someone had made it up, and I see a silhouette of what I thought was one of the kids' faces, but it was pitch black, with bright white eyes. I looked around to see who was missing, but everyone was there. I looked back off the roof, and the sound and the thing were gone. I ignore it, thinking it was just a squirrel or something, and carry on with the conversation. Later, a friend of mine and I decide to talk on one of the sides of the house, and as soon as we crossed the corner, we thought we heard a deer walking through the trees. As we walk closer to get a better look, we hear leaves crunching all around us. We start getting a little spooked and turn around to walk back. When we get closer to the house, we hear leaves crunching right behind us and turn around to see a black stick figure standing not 10 feet away, motionless between the swaying trees, staring at us with those same white eyes I saw on the roof earlier. We both lose our minds and tell everyone we're heading back to the other kid's house. The entire time we're walking off the property and down the driveway, we feel like we're being followed, and still hearing leaves crunching as if someone were right behind us. As soon as we stepped off the driveway onto the main road, we felt an instant relief and didn't hear being followed anymore. We didn't turn around once the entire way back, not until we stepped foot onto the other kid's yard. Ever since then, I will occasionally drive by that house, trying to see if I spot what I saw that night. I've only ever seen a pair of white eyes in the woods that one time. The doctor has never returned, and now I think I know why. 10 years ago, I started working as a CNA in a care home for the elderly. There was a guy who I really got along with, Brian. He was easily my favorite guy to hang around with, and being the only dudes here, we quickly struck up a very strong friendship. He was a great guy, caring, compassionate, and looked after all his patients. He told me a lot of stories about this place, as he had joined straight out of his teens and absolutely loved working here. Stories of spectral figures haunting the hallways, of nights where the cameras would flicker and turn off of their own accord, only to find a patient dead in the morning. Spooky stuff, you know? But there was one story that always got to me: the omen of death. Allegedly, some nights, only nights mind you, would you see a big black dog. I had recently finished watching the Harry Potter movies, and it reminded me a lot of the omen given to Harry of the black dog. I asked if he had just taken this from the book, but he swore up and down that this was true, that even other members of the team had seen this before, and this care home was by no means new, and it was very likely that it had been around a while, and other members of the staff would have seen it. In any case, the story goes a little bit like this: that when someone is about to die, the black dog will appear and stand near their room, sometimes in their room, sometimes outside their room, but near their room the black dog will be. When someone sees it, it is as quick to disappear as you saw it, and that the very next day, death is guaranteed. Quite spooky to say the least. We joked around with it, but I am 100% not into the paranormal, or at least wasn't, and didn't give this any creed. As you can expect with any care home, people come and go relatively quickly. We have some residents that stick around a while and are great fun, and it's always very sad when they leave for the last time. One evening, After I'd been working there about 2 years, I hadn't thought of the black dog in a long time. It had popped up in conversations here and there, but I just brushed it away and ignored it. I was visiting Cecil, one of our older residents, who had actually been there longer than I had. She was a lovely soul. I just did my routine check, made sure she was all good in bed, and carried on for the night. When I realized I didn't have my phone in my pocket, and thought, oh crap, if I'd left it in Cecil's room and it vibrates, it's gonna wake her up. So I started making my way back, looked around outside, and peered into the room through the glass. It was right there, on the chair. I quietly opened the door, hoping not to disturb her, and went around and picked up my phone, quickly put it on mute, and started making my way out. The door opens inwards, and just as I opened the door, did I see a black dog. It was right there in the doorway. It growled at me, and just as quickly as I had seen it did it vanish. I just about pooped my pants, and in my fear, I let go of the door, which shut with a bang. I turn around, assuming that Cecil would wake up at this and deeply needing to apologize, but she didn't stir. Remembering the tale that Brian had told me previously, I just thought I'd check on Cecil to be safe. I approached her bed and listened intently, just to see if she was breathing, but I didn't hear anything. I then established rather quickly that Cecil had expired, some moments ago, no doubt. Cecil had just been talking to me, all fine, very shortly ago, so I was quite shocked that she had gone in such an unexpected manner. But that was it. She was out. I saw the black dog only one more time before I quit working there. Another time, I was working the night shift again, and I was just finishing up my rounds. It was approaching 4 a.m. now, and I was very keen to go home. I'm just prepping all the necessary paperwork for the handover for the day shift team. And I'm just doing a final sweep, just to make sure everyone is still in their bed, when the black dog is again outside a room. This time it doesn't growl, it doesn't move, it just gives a little nod of its head in acknowledgement and vanishes into the air. My gut drops, and I know that this person has met their end. I quietly open the room, hoping that my eyes were just deceiving me. And when I look, the person is definitely gone. Their skin is ice cold. They must have been dead a while, I think. Possibly many hours. With a great sigh, I realize that the dog story is true. And the next day, when I have a conversation with Brian, I admit to him that now I had seen the dog twice. He gives a hearty laugh and tells me that it was true. He gives a hearty laugh and says of course it's true. And he makes a joke, saying that he hopes he doesn't see it outside my house door anytime soon. We laugh, and in a few months' time, I quit, for reasons unrelated to the paranormal. Mostly poor staff management. I'll miss Brian though. In any case, it's definitely made me a believer, but I truly hope not to see that black dog anytime again soon. I've applied for many jobs because I'm the legal age for working as I'm in high school. I am in need of money and need to help out my family, so at this point I would take any job. 5 jobs accepted me, so I decided to do a trial at my first job, That was quick enough to accept, which was McDonald's. I need to say that the staff and the manager are all nice, and my friend works there, which is a total bonus. The only downfall working there was probably the customers, which is something my friend agreed with. But anyway, I didn't know what to pick for shifts, or even if I wanted the job. So I asked for a practice shift. My manager happily agreed and let me choose my times. Instead of a day shift, I chose night, which was a bad decision, but hey, I needed to see what it was like working there. So this meant it would be easy since it's night, right? I was terribly wrong on that. I got ready in my friend's uniform that she let me borrow, and she even drove me there. I'll be honest, the McDonald's was rather sketchy. When I say sketchy, I mean there are so many alcoholics and druggies around, and upon arrival it didn't feel right. During the car ride, I had a gut feeling it wasn't going to be a good shift, but my friend kept reassuring me that it would be fine. She dropped me off at the bus stop, which was 5 minutes from my workplace, and said she would pick me up at 12 a.m. It was 10 p.m., so my practice shift only lasted 2 hours. I agreed and said for her to pick me up at the same spot she dropped me off. As she sped off, I merely watched as her car shrunk into the distance. After I saw it was gone, I started making my walk towards McDonald's. But while walking, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't think much of it because it was a normal thing. The person was probably just walking to their car or McDonald's or even the shops. But I had a gut feeling. I felt like I was being watched, and I stopped for a second. The footsteps stopped with mine, and I looked behind me to see a guy around his mid-40s just eyeing me off. I got weirded out as he just smiled at me and breathed heavily. He was taller than me and looked rather stronger and bigger. He was around what looked to be a few meters away, and I quickly looked away and ran off to my workplace. There were only 3 people working, my manager and my male friend. It was 10:30 p.m. and I had already had a share of drunken rude people filling the orders up. One even tried hitting on me, but he quickly left after my friend showed up to help. He helped me out with most things, and I felt rather safe with him. He was an acquaintance of mine, but we soon grew into best friends. After I was done taking some drunk guy's order, my friend pulled me aside and asked if I knew the guy outside. I was confused at what he meant, and at first I thought he was joking around, until he pointed at the right window. My mouth went dry, and my face dropped. It was the same old guy that was following me before work. I didn't tell him that, because I was an idiot. I just laughed a bit and said it was no big deal. He shrugged it off, and went back to the kitchen. 11 p.m. hit, and no more customers were present, and the same guy would not stop staring at me. At that point I held my head down, and begged, hoping he wouldn't come in. I felt his beady eyes run up and down my body. It was gross. It made me feel dirty. He'd been there since the start of my shift. I started to panic a bit, as I was absolutely begging for him not to come in. In the middle of my thoughts, I heard something. My heart stopped, as it was the door opening. The creepy guy slowly walked towards my counter, eyeing my whole body until he was right in front of me, heavily breathing and drooling almost. His breath reeked like alcohol and cigarettes. He had a musky scent that, to be honest, nearly made me vomit. My red flag was high as I carried on with my nice act. He wouldn't stop staring at me. I glanced at my friend, who was busy in the kitchen, and I turned my attention back to the guy. No matter what I asked, he was silent for a whole 5 minutes, and that went on until he eventually said something. Beautiful skin, so young, short black hair, such a nice complexion you have. Before I could even speak or try to call someone over, I wasn't prepared for what happened. The old guy launched towards me and tried entering the counterpart, which was the same part I was working at. He looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Trying to climb over the counter wasn't easy for him though, eventually trying to grab me and getting stuck midway, and I tried backing up. To my luck, I slipped and landed on my ass. I tried my best crawling away, hoping he wouldn't pass through. I was of course rather startled and afraid to the point where I couldn't utter a word. My friend dropped what he was doing as he screamed for my manager to come over. My manager quickly showed up, which made the old guy get back up to flee. My friend quickly ran to my aid, took me into the back room, which is what my manager told him to do in order to calm me down and to call the cops. I glanced at my friend, as he looked pale and rather puzzled, like he saw a ghost. My manager waited at the counter for the cops, and my friend quickly explained who the guy was. It turned out the guy was known for creeping on the female staff members while they worked. He would take pictures, ask for their number, offer alcohol, and even documented what they looked like. He was already banned from entering the place or even being near it. The cops were very aware of who he was due to his disturbing predatory behavior in the past, and apparently he even sexually assaulted one of the girls after their shift. After the whole investigation and getting questioned, it was 1 a.m., and I was free to go. My friend, the one that drove me, was with my other friend, the one who worked with me. And while I got questioned and was on my way home, my friend held my hand and kept reassuring me everything would be fine. Safe to say that I won't ever go back there again, and I don't trust any night shifts. I have plans of working at a different fast food establishment now. About 10 years ago, I would have been in my early 20s. Me and 2 of my friends decided one night to head down some train tracks and break into an old abandoned coal mine on the outskirts of town. My friend had been there a week before exploring with a buddy, and so we climbed through a hole in the fence they had cut. This place was pitch black, and I had no experience with mining yards, so I could only imagine what these giant looming towers and silos were all around us. I could just barely make out these darker patches that were giant doors and holes in the structure, and hear scuttling noises beyond. These noises could easily be explained as pigeons or bats, so we were not too fazed. We continued to our destination. We knew that our town was surrounded by old World War II forts and bunkers, and there was one on a hill in the middle of the mine yard. As we slowly crept towards our goal, I kept hearing a small tapping noise. Not too alarming, just a small tick, 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 coming from the dark behind us in the direction we had come. We make it to the base of the hill that holds the bunker, and find some way to snake around the only pole light in the yard and up the hill. The whole time, we hear the soft tink, tink, tink behind us. Having made it up the hill and faced with the option to head into the bunker, us brave men decide to pass. Little too creepy for us with no lights to find our way in or out. Instead, we decide to head around back, and this is where things get interesting. We find ourselves standing around a hole with a ladder leading down into a lower level on the bunkers, with that relentless tink, tink, tink coming from somewhere out in the shadows. Now, on 2 sides of us are the steep drop-offs of the hill. On the other sides are the walls of the bunker. We were boxed in on all sides, with only a small path leading out, and with the hole and ladder in the ground at our feet. So we decide this is a good place as any to light a joint, and so I break it out. With my back to the drop of the hill a few feet behind me, and the hole directly at my feet, I try. I'm on the top of a hill without much cover from the wind, and have a difficult time getting the joint lit, and I'm growing frustrated. Not to mention that the tink 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 is starting to get annoying. Up until this point, I assumed it was a metal sign hanging on the fence we climbed through, gently blowing in the wind, and so ignored it. Frustrated with the joint and getting annoyed with the sound, I turned around and stared in its direction. I asked my friends what they thought it was, and tried again to light the joint, but this time I was facing the noise and did not try to conceal the flame. As soon as the lighter flashed, the noise changed from a soft tink 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 into a thunderous boom. "Oh shit, security guards," was the first thing to pop into my head. That booming noise is them running down metal stairs in one of the dark towers. They saw my face when the lighter's fire illuminated me, and they must be on their way. All three of us crouch halfway between flight and fight, unsure if we should run, hide, or do nothing. We all decide to wait. It's too dark for them to find us easily, and they're so loud that we'll hear them the minute they get close. Boom! The noise just won't stop, and I swear it's getting louder. How long are those stairs, I think? This is weird. And I swear I hear movement in the grass in the darkness at the bottom of the hill. We all agree it was probably just the wind in the grass, but decide it was time to sneak our way out of this place. Slowly crouching through the dark, we move through the mining yard towards our exit, when we run into a problem. Whatever is making the noise in between us and the exit. We squat down the middle of an open gravel road to try figuring out our next move. Safe in the thought, it was just too dark for anyone to see us sitting there in the dirt. But just to be sure, we picked a spot that placed a large chain link fence between us and that god-awful boom boom boom. Now at this point I decided to upgrade the guards to cops in my mind, and I was becoming a bit antsy, but we decided to wait them out. I guess at this point we all realized that none of this is making any sense. The guards or cops should have reached the bottom of the stairs by now, and that's when it got even weirder. With the boom in front of us and nothing to do but wait if we wanted to use our only known exit, we start to hear something else. In the dark all around us, but somewhere close and on the same gravel we're crouching on, things start to move. There was a thud noise, and then a slow scraping noise as something was dragged across the gravel. Then again from elsewhere, quiet but very close. These noises were all around us, thuds, then a slow dragging across gravel, but we could not really pinpoint in which direction they were coming from. At this point, I go from rational adult to scared kid, and think of all the people who died at this mine, or what could be living in those tunnels. In my mind, the noise went from guards to police, shot past ghost, and is now smack dab in the middle of goblin and giant rat. Of course, we have to get the hell out of there, and decide that climbing the fence behind the mine, running into the woods, and making our way into the highway is our only option. And so we pick our butts up out of the dirt and sneak as fast as we can the hell out of there. We're making it. The noises are now behind us and not getting any closer, and we find rows and rows of empty coal train cars. Perfect. We can walk freely between them with no chance of being spotted from a distance. With the end of the mine yard close by, and with the protection of the train cars, we relax a bit and talk in a less hushed whisper. I guess that was a mistake. A few seconds after entering the rows of train cars, the first car explodes in a boom noise. Whatever was making that booming noise was right behind us, only feet away. I have never in my life, nor I ever, I'm sure, moved so swiftly again. The hundreds of feet between me and the fence to the outside world flew by, and I still do not understand how I got over the 10-foot fence so easily. I just remember leaping off it into the dark. We made it into the road and ahead back to town. The roads bend around the mine, and we could still hear the relentless boom of something smashing that train. My friends got too uncomfortable talking about it and seemed content to forget anything weird ever happened. But my curiosity drives me nuts, and I've gone back there a few times over the years. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened, and the last time I went by myself, everything was torn down and taken away. This happened to my grandmother, and she swears up and down that what you are about to hear is true. Many years ago, she had an accident, as old ladies often do, and ended up breaking her hip. She had to be taken to the hospital, and it turned out that she had several problems with her, and that it would take a long time for her to heal. Most of the healing needed to be done in the hospital in order to monitor her and assure she was receiving the proper care, and finally, a care home, a sort of intermediary between hospital and home, before she could finally be discharged. I went to visit her a few times, and the conditions were appalling. There were so many people crammed into such small wards. The air was toxic and suffocating, and I knew my grandmother wasn't enjoying it. However, it wasn't before long that she was moved to a much nicer, far more comfortable place in the care home. I went to visit her there one afternoon and asked her how her day was, brought her some snacks, some flowers, and tried to cheer her up. I spoke with her all afternoon about all kinds of things, and just as I'm about to leave, she grabs my hand and looks at me in the eye. "Don't go," she says. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, but I keep putting it off because I think I'm going mad." I give her a little smile and tell her it's all right and that I'll always believe her. Probably. She looks around to see who's looking and hearing. Thankfully, there was no one else in the room at the time as she was sitting up in bed. She squeezes my hand tightly and beckons me to come closer, and I do. She says, "There's a little girl who comes and plays in here at night. I don't know if she's one of the workers' children or something, but she's always here. She wakes me up when she skips across the room. She picks up things and puts them back like any curious child, and after a few minutes, I hear her singing gently in the corridor and then disappear." I look at her and ask, "Is that all?" And she nods, but then says, "She's here every night at the same time, 2 a.m. My grandma is a very light sleeper, and at first I told her that it was all right and that it was probably just a member of staff who had a child or something, trying my best to convince her. But my grandmother is no fool, and looked at me in the eye and said, "I think we both know what's going on here." And she was right. We were both confident it was a ghost. But I told her not to worry, and that it might not come back, for she was quite frightened of it. So she ignored it and carried on as I left. I don't visit her for 2 days due to work, and when I come back, I again strike up a conversation with her. She tells me all about how she's excited that she's going to leave, as she's been given permission to leave next week, and she was incredibly anxious to go home. Again, just before I leave, does she squeeze my hand and tell me again that the little ghost girl had returned. But then, more curiously, that my jacket had disappeared. She said that when she woke up at the sound of the little ghost girl, that this time she looked at her dead in the eye and just carried on skipping away. The thing is, I left my jacket on a chair next to my grandmother's bed, and when she woke up next morning it had been gone. She asked all of the day and night staff if they had moved it, but none of them seemed to be able to locate it. The days were ticking along quickly, and although I myself wasn't that concerned with the disappearance of my coat, as it was old and worn, my grandmother, with very little to do, had made it her mission to find what had happened to it. She was semi-mobile, as she had one of those frames, and she started scooting around the place, looking up and down, trying to find desperately where this coat was, which was very ill-advised according to the nurses. She didn't find it, but the day before she left, she was growing increasingly annoyed and got in a bad temper with the nurses, saying that they must have moved it and not forgotten, and even accused one of them of stealing it. When she fell asleep, she awoke as usual to the sound of footsteps skipping across the floor. She opened her eyes and saw the little girl quickly dart past the door of her room, and just as she was about to close her eyes again, did she notice my coat resting gently on the chair. She was convinced that either the ghost girl had moved it and was returning it to her before her departure, or she had found where it had been lost and was giving it back. In any case, my grandmother thought it was a very nice gesture, and was happy and calm with the ghost girl for one last time. She left the next day, her health improved, and to this day she is still fine. But the question in my mind remained about these strange happenings. So about a year later, when I had some free time, I decided to look into the place where this hospital care home was. It turns out that in 1910, this was a school that operated in the area. It wasn't until the Second World War that this school was hit by a bomb. Although there were no kids here when it happened, there was a family that lived next to the school, and all of the inhabitants of that house perished. I came to find out that a family of 4, a son, a daughter, and a mother and father, had all lived there and died. I know the girl was around 10 years old and the son about 3, so it's likely in my head that the girl could have attended the school very next door to her home, and that this is where she chooses to haunt, as it must be where she spent many an hour and fun times during her brief life on this plane. Little ghost girl, thanks for getting me my coat back. I hope you have a safe and peaceful existence. In college, I was a late afternoon shift from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. security guard at a chemical factory on Sunday. I don't know what kind of chemicals they made, but it was comprised of 3 buildings and whose prior use was just an orange juice factory. It was cool, and the guy who would replace me at 11 was this big 6'3" guy. He would sometimes get dropped off early, and we would just chill and talk. Well, I had to walk to the property at 10:30 p.m. Every time I walked, I had no problems. Here's the thing. Of the 3 buildings, 2 were for actually mixing, heating and emulsification, and 1 building had administrative offices. That administrative office was always closed since it was the weekend. Well, one time, this guy gets dropped off at 10:15, and he decides to walk with me at 10:30. So the administrative building is last, and we're walking towards and everything is off. So we circle the building, and as we're walking back, the office light turns on. This was the first time I'd ever seen this, since no one is supposed to be there. I pull out my keys and start walking towards the building to enter and see if someone is inside. At this point, the guy looks at me, grabs my arm and says, "Don't go in there, just leave it." I turn and look at him, and his face looks dead serious. He's looking right at me like he's seen a ghost. You've got to realize I'm 19 years old, still a kid inside really, and not afraid of anything. But looking at his face made me nope the hell out of there. When we got back to the guard shack, he told me that once on his walks at around 3 a.m. the same thing happened. He went in and the office felt really cold. He turned off the light, and as he left the building it turned on again. He re-enters as he's about to turn it off, and he said something pushes him from behind. Immediately he turns around and exits the building and tells me he'll never step foot in it again. I talked to one of the old workers there about it, and he said that when the place was a juice factory, the building housed a larger juicer and someone had an accident and died. Don't know if it's true, but the old worker told me he would never go in that building at night either. A few weeks later I quit, so that I would never have to deal with that again. This happened a few years ago, and I figured I'd share it, as I find myself wondering what happened almost every day. My friend and I were interested in investigating a nearby abandoned factory that had a fire happen in it many years ago. So we geared up, grabbing everything we could to make sure we would be okay going into this place. There was a shattered glass window at the back of the factory, where we were going to enter the building from. The first time we pulled into the parking lot, she told me that she didn't like the feeling she was getting, so I pulled away from the building. We turned down a road, seeing a shadow with no features walking down the side of the building. His gait suggested he was injured. So I turned around, and he was closer this time. We turned around to leave again, with our eyes on him the entire time, and he was gone. We chose to leave at that very moment and try and find a new location, and my friend started to become very silent and unresponsive to me talking to her. As we passed a few places, she started speaking in a monotone voice, staring straight ahead the whole time. She was telling me that someone hung themselves at this place. Someone burnt to death here. Someone shot someone here. Meanwhile, I tried to converse with her to no avail. We left the city we were in and pulled into a Walmart. As we were sitting there, she suddenly came to, asking where we were and what time it was and why we were there. She had no recollection of anything she had said or of any location we had visited. I then showed her a half-hour recording of her that I took on my old cell phone, and she was shocked and had to leave immediately. I went home and researched all the deaths she was talking about, and they were all accurate. A few years ago, I was working a night shift on a generic rehabilitation ward in an old hospital that since closed down. The ward was a long L-shaped corridor with the nurses' station situated at the bend. I was doing some paperwork at the nurses' station, and the other nurse on duty was on her break, sitting in the lounge at the end of the corridor. Out of nowhere, I heard this almighty crash from one of the bedrooms, and I shot straight up and started running towards it. My colleague was coming down the corridor towards me, as we had both assumed that the gentleman in one of the single beds had fallen out of the bed. The man in this room was still fast asleep in bed, and his sensor mat told us that he had not gotten up. In the middle of the room lay his bedside cabinet, face down on the ground. Further across from that, the drawer from it was against the floor, the wall across from where the cabinet usually faced. We didn't really know what to make of it, so I picked up the cabinet and put the drawer back in. We woke the man up and asked him if he had thrown it, but he was as confused as we were. Realistically, he couldn't have moved it anyway. It was quite heavy, and he was pretty frail, needing help to even mobilize. It's not possible that another patient had been in the room, as we did a round immediately after, and everyone was in bed. No one had been in the corridor prior to this happening. For the next few weeks, I felt really uncomfortable being in that room, even the day duties, and was so glad when the hospital closed down, as it meant I got to move to a brand newly built one. Years ago, I used to work as a security guard in an abandoned psych complex that is now a heritage-listed site. At the time, there was a company trying to sell the land, so one others and myself were employed to run graveyard shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and ensure that kids didn't sneak and burn down the place and generally mess it up. One night around 2 a.m., when it was quite dark, the other guard and myself did our hourly patrol. While he circled counterclockwise, I went through the center of 4 different buildings to check for holes in the fence. While I had my torch, I saw a young lady who couldn't have been more than 22 to 25 years old, and quite pretty, although a little disheveled. She approached me and said that she was trying to find some men who had taken something from her. Of course, being the only one around, I asked her if there was anything more I could do, including phoning the police to come by. She declined with a short smile and seemed pretty despondent. Figuring that she might try and hurt herself, I said that I was here if she needed help, but it was a dangerous area, so I would escort her out. At this point, she gave one of the most blood-curdling screams I have ever heard, and tears streamed down her face, a quicker mood change, the likes of which I'd never seen. Taken aback is the least of my feelings. She screamed, "I'll find them! I'll find them!" before sprinting behind one of the buildings. It took me half a second to gather myself, but I started after her. Now I seriously thought that A, she would harm herself or someone else, B, drugs are one hell of a thing, as she disappeared behind one of the buildings, and not half a second later did my partner waltz out from behind that same building. He'd not seen anyone run past, nor heard a thing, and that scream was loud. Long story short, from here it turns out that this ward was functioning before any of the normal guidelines came into force, and it was obvious people there were treated worse than animals. Apparently, it was not unheard of for female psych patients to become pregnant, who knows from where, and subsequently, their babies were taken from them at birth. I quit the next day, as did my partner. Nightclubs for me, thanks. Today, me and my 2 friends went up on the mountain behind my house, up to an abandoned mine. We went up to play airsoft, so we had a bunch of airsoft rifles. It was foggy and drizzling, but we didn't think about it. Anyway, at 4:50 we were starting to leave. By this time, it was almost dark out, and there was a very heavy fog setting all around us. We were just messing about by the old abandoned bucket crane when my friend Connor says that he sees a figure looming towards us in the fog. We thought it might have been a cop or some crackhead, so naturally we started hustling to leave. But the figure seemed off. It looked big and burly, and seemed to move towards us at a relatively quick pace. I should mention that the fire siren from the neighboring town started going off, and the forest goes dead quiet. So Connor yelled out to it, to receive no response. I swear I saw a dog-like creature, but my friend says he saw a person. We took off down the old gravel road, just down the bend, so we were out of sight off the thing, and ducked into the woods, down about a 10 or 12-foot tall hill. We got 500 feet away from the road when we stopped to see if we were being followed. I saw behind some trees at about my 11 o'clock a figure that seemingly ducked behind the tree. My friend said things were moving to my 1 o'clock. They said they heard screaming almost like a wailing. I, however, heard a dog's bark. We slowly started back and eventually got to an ATV trail where we found a path down to the street. We sprinted down the path and eventually hit the road where my friend said it was following us to the road, where once we were a block away, through the fog and in the middle of the road, I saw the dog sitting, looking at us, but my friends claimed to have again seen a person. My question is, what the hell was that? A skinwalker perhaps? We live in eastern Pennsylvania, so I think that's unlikely. Any suggestions as to what it could be would be appreciated. At the age of 18, I got my first CNA job, working at a care facility. The job was night shift. One night, after our rounds were finished, me and a co-worker were sitting at the nurse's station telling ghost stories. One of our longtime residents was a notorious gossip, Dave, and decides to chip in and tells about a little girl who haunts the second floor. At the time, the second and third floors had both been closed for years. He finished the story by telling us she plays with a ball, and if you're quiet and listen, you can hear the ball bounce. Right at the moment he finishes his story, a call light for a resident goes off. A resident who I've never seen use her call light before or since. When I go into her room to check on her, she's laying in her bed with a terrified look on her face pointing at the ceiling. I was a little freaked out, but easily reasoned it away. I did, however, tell the story to my sister. 4 years later, I am now working day shift in the same building, and the second and third floors have been renovated and are now house sub-acute care patients. These patients are mostly surgery recovery and will go home after their stay. My sister is also working there as a CNA, and I work the third floor and she the second. One Sunday afternoon, she comes to me with a pale face and wide eyes, and proceeds to tell me, "You know, Carrie, I went into her room for last rounds and asked her if she needed anything before I left. She looked over me all happy and said she had the most wonderful day watching that girl play." I looked at her in puzzlement and asked her which girl. "The one playing with her ball, she's so sweet." My sister looks at me in the eyes and says, "I've been up and down that hall all day and haven't seen any kids visiting." Of course, we both remember the story from years before, but come now, it's simply a coincidence, right? Also, Carrie died that very night. I have been working as a guard for a few months at one site, and I've noticed a series of odd occurrences since my first day. The layout of my patrol is a two-part office building. One side is the north side, using only the first floor for offices. the second floor and the first floor for storage for space chairs and cubicle walls. The other side, south side, is abandoned, when the company housed in that section moved to a new location, both floors being filled with cubicles, chairs, desks, and posters dating from 2013. No files or personal property are in the south section, but the lights don't work properly due to weather damage in 2016. When I started, I patrolled the bottom of the north offices, which is mostly barren aside from a tornado shelter, cubicle walls stored against a wall, and the janitor supply room. Down on this floor, I have felt my jacket grabbed more than once while checking the area. The second floor with the office is more active than the bottom floor. The chairs move and roll into the hallway, and the sound of filing cabinets slams shut. But when I check to see if anyone is around, I find some half-open papers on the floor. The south building is the worst one. The first day I did a patrol, I had chairs, not desk one with wheels, move positions more than once. And while I'd like to blame my co-workers, only 2 people have keycards to that building: security and maintenance. And when I'm on the top floor, I've heard office doors slam shut, and when I investigate to find the doors, I will routinely hear footsteps upstairs. My co-workers have claimed to hear voices and seen shadows, and the closest thing I've had happen besides the sound was a flashlight. New batteries that I replaced the day before constantly flickering on the bottom floor of the south building and returning to normal once I leave. Now I will be trying to investigate again. I want to take a digital recorder and see what happens. Or do you think it was just a hardware issue? I'm going to make sure that I find out. My parents explore abandoned towns and mines as a hobby. When I was younger, I would get dragged along with them, but when I started college, I stopped going with them. However, in those times that I did go with them, I did encounter a lot of things that made me feel uneasy. Of course, I am and always have been a skeptic, so I always just assumed that it was the atmosphere getting to me. But there was one time that I legitimately can't explain what I saw. For context, I live in Arizona, and most of the places we explored were in the northern part of the country. There's quite a few towns in that area that are dying or have already died, and there are plenty of mines that have long since been out of operation. I can't remember where this encounter took place, but I do know my parents wanted to visit it after they saw some paranormal investigation show cover the site of this abandoned mine. My parents aren't exactly paranormal investigators, but they do like visiting and photographing creepy locations, and supposedly haunted locations usually end up having some truly haunting imagery. Getting to this mine was more trouble than any of us expected. The road was so rough that we had to park off to the side and walk a mile or 2 to even get there. I don't remember if she heard this from anyone in the local town or if it was mentioned in the TV show, but apparently a few years prior a couple of kids went exploring at the mine and went missing. It was an assumption that the kids probably fell down an open shaft as they weren't blocked off, and once I got a good look at them myself, they truly looked like bottomless pits. More so than any other creepy place we have visited, I just felt so uncomfortable here. I'm not a particularly violent person, but a voice in the back of my mind kept telling me to push my stepmom down into the mine shaft. After all, she was standing right in front of them with her back turned to me while she was trying to take pictures down it. No matter how much I tried to shake off the idea, I couldn't help but feel like it was in my best interest to just push her down. Once she stepped away from the bottomless pit, the thought went away and I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I've heard that these kind of morbid thoughts aren't too uncommon, especially around ledges, but part of me feels like this was different, even though I can't say I have any proof that it was. I just had this feeling, this overwhelming hatred come over me in those moments that she stood standing in front of it, and a few seconds felt like hours. After she was done taking pictures around that area, she went to go photograph some other areas while my father and I started walking down a path to see if there was anything of interest on the other side. While we were coming around a bend in the path, we saw someone else. It was a man who looked to be in his mid-20s. He was decked out in full mining gear, and although I'm no expert on mining attire, it definitely looked old-fashioned. He gave us a wave and walked off the path towards an empty clearing, where I assume there probably were more open shafts, although I wouldn't know, because my father immediately turned to me and told us we had to leave. I've tried coming up with explanations for who this man was, but there are lots of things that didn't add up. The mine there wasn't operational, so obviously there wouldn't be anyone in full mining gear walking around. I considered for a long time that it could have just been a practical joke of some kind on anyone who went there after seeing the Paranormal TV show. However, we saw no vehicles on the way up the rugged road, and we didn't visit this place right after it featured on said TV show. It must have been at least 6 months after, not to mention it's not easy to find. We literally had to hunt down locals and ask them for directions, because Google wasn't helpful in telling us where to go, as the road leading to the mine was unmarked. It's been 7 years, and I still get chills whenever I think about it. I worked at a forensic state facility that housed mentally disabled men who were unable to stand trial. My shift was from 9:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. I thought it was funny that a lot of my co-workers were into the ghost stories, but I learnt real quick that all you could do was laugh at things you couldn't explain. One night I was sitting in a chair in the doorway of my one-to-one client. His room was the last room of the hallway near the exit door, so it was dark on that side of the hall when the lights were off. I had seen a dark sort of figure under the exit sign that was placed above the exit door. I stared at it for about a minute, trying to register what I was actually seeing, before I could get through my head that this was something unusual. The figure rushed towards me, causing me to jump and fall out of my chair. I laughed because I thought I looked silly on camera, as there were cameras covering every inch of the hallway. I also joked with other co-workers, saying I was part of the ghost story gang. That same night I was in the chart room at around 4:30 a.m. to file observation notes of the residents in the chart book. The books were really heavy and weren't easy to tote around. After I filled all the charts, as we had 12 residents on my home, and put the books back on the shelf, they flew off the shelf as they were being thrown and landed in the middle of the room. At that time, I was more upset than concerned, because it was a long and hellish night, and I had to just put those books up. There were other instances when I had seen things I couldn't explain. One instance was when I had seen a headless figure standing at the end of the hallway, the same spot where I had seen that shadow. I thought it was a resident at first because he was wearing a white t-shirt, blue basketball shorts and white sneakers. He resembled another resident who lived on a different home, as he was the only individual on campus that was close to 7 foot and nearly 400 pounds. I walked towards it calling the individual's name, but got no reaction from the figure. I looked down to get my break room key from my pocket, because I thought the resident needed something to drink, and we often had the good stuff. When I looked up, the figure was gone. There were other times when the shadows would be out, and I noticed it was usually when our residents were asleep in the room most of the night. I told my new co-worker about all I have seen on my home, and she laughed, saying I was just as crazy as the other people on the night shift. The next night after that conversation, she was to work a shift on her own. After that night, she demanded to be moved to another home. I was curious about her transfer and went to read the observation and home notes from the last night she worked. It said 4:30 a.m., all residents asleep in their beds throughout the night. I guess they didn't like the new girl's sense of humor. This happened when I was 16. In high school, I'm working my first part-time job at a fast food restaurant, located right off the highway, and it wasn't uncommon to get a lot of crazy customers. I arrived at work one day and was surprised to see that my schedule for the week had changed, giving me a graveyard shift on a Friday night. The thought of being at this place overnight gave me the creeps, and thought my manager was insane for making the youngest employee take night shift. But it wasn't a school night, and I didn't want to seem like a baby, so I accepted the shift. When the night came, it was just me and another co-worker who was a larger man and very friendly, so I felt more safe with him there. Before leaving, my manager gave me the rundown on how the night shift was supposed to go. At 11 p.m, I was to lock the doors and we would be only taking drive-through orders. But on this particular night, one of the main doors had been broken and wouldn't lock properly. If anyone comes in, tell them they can't be in the lobby and to order through the drive-through. After these words of wisdom, my manager went home to the comfort of his bed, and I started my long night. Being slightly paranoid and not used to the new shift, every noise I heard from outside made me jump. A few times some customers came in through the unlocked door, but quickly and politely left after asking them to use the drive-through. When it reached about 1 a.m, I was in the back of the store organizing boxes, when I heard the slam of the heavy doors close. I ran to the front to tell whoever it was to get out, but saw no one. I walked into the lobby and looked around, but couldn't see anyone there. "Did you hear someone come in?" I asked my co-worker, as he also came to investigate. "Maybe they left. I'll check the bathroom to be safe," he said, as he opened the men's bathroom and quickly came back out. "No one here. You should check the girls." I agreed and opened the door to the ladies' room. At first I didn't see anything, so I called out, "Is anyone in here?" No response. To double check, I took a few steps into the bathroom, and at this time I was able to see some feet behind a stall. The stall door was wide open, and as I got closer I was able to see inside. My stomach instantly sank. I caught eyes with a woman with long, tangled brown hair, crouched next to the toilet with a needle in her arm. She jumped out of surprise and ripped the needle out of her arm, squirting blood all over the floor. She raised the needle over her head and started to move towards me. I screamed as fast as I could and ran out the bathroom past my co-worker. I ripped around just in time to see her run out the door. My heart was racing as I was scared to death, and I ended up going home right after. I quit the very next day. I am an avid urban explorer, and in December a friend and I drove to a location about 45 minutes away from home. It was in a small town in Pennsylvania. To get to the abandoned house, and more or less crumbling house, we had to drive on a one-lane road through a forest. When we entered that road, there was a dead deer lying on the side of the road. Not uncommon, but it would be later on. Then her GPS malfunctioned and told us to return to the route, even though we were already on it. The arrow was pointing in the opposite direction we were going, away from the forest. We kept driving anyway and turned into the parking lot. There were only a few cars. There's a walking trail in the forest that people use to bike and run. We go to the structure, an old water tower, and take some pictures, and opt to walk on the trail. We're both feeling really off, like there was a secret that everyone on the path knew except for us. We were the only ones on the path, and we were walking and making small talk when we heard a bike bell behind us. We turn around, and a woman goes ahead of us on her bike, and then stops to tie her shoe. We keep walking, and my friend says, "Look at her bike, there's no bell on it." So we have no idea where the bell came from. There were only about 4 cars in the parking lot, but we ended up passing over 30 people. They all stared at us too, never breaking eye contact. Then my friend pointed out something, a boulder that had a stream of water trickling down it, but there wasn't a source or a crack. It was just starting from the middle of the rock. Again, it was weird. We kept walking down the trail, and I stopped and pointed into the forest. There was a tall black figure standing far by the trees. It looked like a man, but I couldn't make out any clothes or even a face. We were looking at it when there was a loud snapping noise right behind us, like a tree branch. We turned around quickly, but there weren't any sticks or branches on the ground at all. When we looked back in the direction of the figure, it was gone, all in about 5 seconds. The entire time we felt drowsy and off, so we decided that we were going to walk back to the car and leave. There was no one else there, and no cars in the parking lot. We drove back through the forest road. We were only out there for about an hour, and when we got to the intersection that brought us out to the forest, the deer was still on the side of the road, except it was entirely bones. Just a skeleton, not even bloody. It was completely clean. All that was left was the head, which was still on the skeleton. Nothing could have eaten or skinned it that fast, especially not without leaving any fur or blood. At this point we were freaked out enough and just wanted to go home. And then her trunk opened. There's a certain button on the car that you have to press, and her hands weren't even near it. She got out the car to close it, and all of the doors in the car clicked and locked on their own, except my passenger door that stayed unlocked. We had service too, but her GPS wouldn't start to work again until we were out of that town. I don't really know what happened, but it felt like something in that place wanted us gone. And every time we pointed out something that was strange, something else would distract us from looking too closely at it. I'd love some closure to this. It still makes me feel uneasy. Sometimes I dream about it, and the same word always comes into the dream. Harvest. I don't know why. A couple of minutes ago I looked up the coordinates to the place, because I had them on my phone but couldn't remember the address. The people wanted to know where this place was, and the first thing to pop up was abandoned paper mills to be demolished on Friday. There was no talk of demolishing the place a month ago. I work night shift in a hospital as a caregiver. Part of my job entails watching over disoriented and confused patients, and ones that are approaching death. I am working in the medical ward, so we have a lot of elderly patients with dementia and/or Alzheimer's. A few nights ago, we admitted a very tiny old lady of 91 with pneumonia. She is completely blind but totally mobile, and her mind is still crystal clear. She used to be an English teacher, and her whole personality and the way she speaks, as well as her vocabulary and pronunciation, attests to that. A very stubborn, independent, and strong-willed lady. I was assigned to take care of her for the night, as she was not familiar with the layout of the room, and would walk into things trying to find the bathroom and possibly injure herself. It went well for the first few hours. We chatted about stuff until about 11, when I said she must try to get some sleep. I'm sitting right by her side, and she can just say if she needs anything. She agrees, turns over and makes herself comfortable. After a while she's fiddling with the blankets and being restless, I lean over to her to switch on the dim bedside light to see how I can help her. When she says to me, "Oh, you have the most beautiful blue eyes." While I'm trying to figure out how this blind lady knows I have blue eyes and how to respond, she continues, "And while you're up, please get an extra blanket for the little boy that's sitting on my bed. His skin is cold as ice." As if there's nothing weird about it. I immediately got a cold shiver down my back, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. As if that wasn't enough, the call bell in the bathroom in the room started ringing without anyone being there. I switched the bell off and told her that I would be back now with a blanket, and went to ask a colleague to relieve me and take a blanket in. Everything, I'm sure, can be rationally explained away. But as I'm fascinated by the paranormal, I found this experience chilling and wanted to share it. Lots of weird stuff happens at the hospital, especially at night, and it's easy to get creeped out when alone in the dark with a dying or disoriented patient. My brother used to work the graveyard shift at a grocery store. Usually there were 3 employees during the shift. Everyone started at 9:30 p.m. except for my brother. He started at 3 a.m. I remember him telling me creepy stories that would happen there. One time a guy got robbed while walking to the store entrance from the parking lot. Another time, someone was throwing out trash and saw a homeless guy sleeping by it. One time, my brother was on break, sitting in his car, and saw a guy looking in cars. There's just so many stories he shared with me. The most scary for him is the one he experienced 2 years ago before he resigned, as he got another, better paying job. He had just parked his car, and as usual, he always looked around before getting down. He didn't see anyone and decided to get down. He started walking up to the store when he heard footsteps behind him. He looked, and he sees a guy wearing all black. The guy has an oversized jacket and a hoodie on. My brother is walking at a normal pace, and this guy is speed walking. My brother starts walking faster and puts his hand into his pocket, where he has a box cutter utility knife. As he is approaching the entrance, he prays to God that someone opens the door fast, as sometimes he'd have to wait about 10 minutes before the other employees would open it. They were jerks. Anyway, as he turned the corner, he sees an employee smoking a cigarette in front of the store. When the creep turns the corner and sees the other guy, he immediately turns around and walks back to where he came from. The other employee asked my brother if he was following him. My brother replied in the affirmative, and that if it wasn't for him being outside, he would have had to have fought the guy. My brother is the most respectful and hard worker I know, but he always tells me that he was not going to go out without a fight. I would always worry for him because of all the stories he told me. A lot of people would even quit because they didn't want to be a victim of those guys. Some refused to take out the trash alone. I feel like my brother got lucky that night. Even he feels that way. He said in all the 10 years he worked there, he never saw an employee outside. He would always have to wait a couple of minutes knocking on the glass, call the store for someone to open the door, and sometimes he'd even see an employee standing a few feet from him stocking the shelves, and they would just ignore him. For all you graveyard workers, be aware of your surroundings. This was 5 years ago. My good friends and I were about 15 years of age, and doing what kids do, we snuck out every weekend and had older friends in high school to drive us places. In this particular situation, we decided to check out this 8-floor abandoned hospital 10 minutes away from our city. It being 8 a.m., and one of the worst winters in Michigan we had seen in the past 12 years. It was at least -15, with wind chill, because the hospital was less than 200 feet from the Detroit River. So my friends and I arrive, trying not to draw attention because we didn't want police attention. We jumped a 6-foot brick wall only to fall into the courtyard, which had easily 5 feet of unshoveled snow. So we trudged through it to the only entrance of the hospital, which is a back door with a staircase that goes up and down to the basement. Every other door was chained or barricaded, so we made entry and immediately saw satanic worshipping symbols on the walls in red spray paint. Some type of sacrificed animal, which was far too mutilated to even tell what it was, but judging by the size, I'd guess it could have been a small dog. So at this point, my 4 friends and I are disgusted, horrified, and a little bit pissed off. 2 of my friends go down to the basement, while me and the other 2 go upstairs. Flashlights in tote, we all kept seeing silhouettes moving across the hallway in front of us, but always from a distance, so we brushed it off for the moment. But then we had a medical desk tip over in the room down the hall from us, which sent items flying out the room into the hall. We ran so fast, not knowing if it was a bomb or a demon. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, my other 2 friends in the basement of the hospital had found the room where they stored all the hospital beds and swore that something was thrown right at them, and they were certain they found the morgue, and they just had to check it out, because there was something that they had to see. So as we moved down the stairs, I kept hearing faint singing, but as if it were a little girl, so I kept thinking my friend behind me was being a smartass. "Stop it, John." "Thought it was you," he replies. So we stop in unison, and all of us hear what sounds like a little girl humming a song, but it wasn't further than a few flights of stairs above us. We all said screw it, ran out the building, hopped the wall and left. Since then we have tried to return, but they have picked up police patrols in the area, so it would have been far too risky. I work in maintenance in a hospital, but this story comes from out of work hours. Back in November, my grandfather passed away. He had been living in a care home for several years now, and as we were from a smaller city, his main care aide was actually an ex's mother who I am still close to. Nearing his final days, she texted me that things weren't looking good, and to get my mum, who works out of town, and myself, to see him ASAP. The next 2 nights were exhaustive. Her and I barely left his bedside. We were wetting his lips, rubbing his head, and singing Charlie Pride, and telling him stories from my childhood and from my mum's. At one point, Is Anybody Going to San Antonio comes on the CD player, and Mum tears up, talking about how this song reminds her of her father the most. He wasn't really coherent besides a glimmering moment in the first day we got there, and by the final day we were sitting watching the breaths turn to choke breaths. As the hours got nearer, my ex's mum was contacted and came in on her day off to sit with us for that final hour. My mum had her father's head in her lap, and we still had Charlie Pride on the radio. She was whispering in her ear to stop being stubborn, and that she could take care of her brothers, and that she had me to take care of her. The gaps got longer and longer in his breaths. My ex's mum was sitting next to me, the CD player behind us, and my mum laying on the opposite side of the care home bed. All of a sudden, his breathing stops, and in that moment so did the CD player. It hadn't skipped once the whole weekend. My mum figured Tyrene had turned it off, starting to sob, assuming it was to signify he was officially gone. I sat and looked at Tyrene like, did that just happen? And after a good 20 seconds out of nowhere, he took a shuddery breath, and the CD scrambled forward. And the song just before Is Anyone Going to San Antonio? Not sure if that's the name of the song, but it was about not wanting to miss someone, started playing. And then he was gone by the end of San Antonio, the song that Mum remembered him most by. Tyrene mentioned odd things happen more often than not as a person finally passes. I worked as a CNA at a local nursing home that was on the edge of town, a country-like setting. I worked the night shift. It was easier than day, and the nurses and assistants got along well. I was a baby at only 19. We would take turns running up the highway about 5 miles to a 24-hour convenience store, grab snacks, and go back. I would often volunteer to go. My apartment was right behind the store, and I knew the clerk, and I enjoyed the ride, being away for a minute, even if it was 3 a.m. This was the 90s, and for some reason I felt that it was safer than it is now, as you will most likely not find me out after dark alone now. While at the store, I noticed a man in a car looking at me. He absolutely gave me creeps at first glance. That gut feeling of something being wrong. I go inside and pick out everything and return to the car. The guy is driving around the parking lot and pulls out before me, but as I get up to the highway a bit, as it's a straight shot from the nursing home to the store, he pulls over to the side and gets behind me once I pass. I am completely aware of him. I know he's following me, and I have no cell phone with me. I get back to the nursing home, which has good lighting, and pull up to the front door. The guy has just turned in behind me and I'm freaking out. I just want to get inside. We keep the doors locked, but a rug was in the front door for me. I run to the door, but as I stop to look at what this guy's doing, I look just in time to see this guy pull under a light and jump out. His pants are down, ready for him to expose himself to me. I was so upset by that brief encounter, I went into the bathroom and cried. I couldn't tell anyone right away for some reason. Then I got to thinking about him being outside when the smokers go. So I told everyone. I don't think we even called the police. I really wish I... A couple of years ago, me and some friends had a short-lived phase of trying to go to as many cool abandoned places as we could. One of these was a very old hospital that had been closed down for roughly 20 to 30 years. It was pretty central in a big town, so it was quite regularly maintained in terms of boarding up windows and stuff. Our first visit started with us climbing through a window near the middle of the building. We managed to pry a plywood board up from the window, but as soon as me and my 3 other friends got in that room and opened the door into the main hallway, we all agreed pretty quickly that we shouldn't be there, and left. This is unusual for us, as we clearly weren't scared of much if we were easily able to break and enter into a building in the middle of town. We had also never been scared or anxious of anything before, and it weirded us out to the point that we all agreed to leave immediately. Our second visit is where it got proper weird. We went back around 2 weeks later, and all of the plywood on the windows was replaced with metal sheets, which isn't strange for a building in a large town where people are trying to break in regularly, apart from the fact that the window we went through originally was completely open. We climbed through anyway, and all got the same feelings again, except when we tried to open the door into the hallway. It was locked, and felt as if something was pushed up against it on the other side. We left back through the window, and I was last. And I was about halfway out the window when I heard a young girl laugh pretty much directly behind me in this small room, and I near fell out of the window trying to get away from it. I thought it was just my mind being weird at first, until one of my friends asked if I heard the laugh, and if that's why I jumped through this window. All my other friends heard it too, and said it sounded like it came from that room. All of this is pretty normal stuff, and I'm sure the door being locked and having something behind it was just someone moving stuff around inside, if them and my friends were exploring it too. The young girl's laugh we all heard in the room we were in, and we felt that feeling on both visits. I worked permanent night shifts in a large care home for 2.5 years. It was a really old house that had been converted and had bits added onto it. Often it sometimes buzzed in the night and would wake up at least one other person who would usually want the toilet, a drink, or think it was the time to wake. Our duties involved helping people to bed, then some lights, cleaning the laundry, and we stayed as quiet as we could in order not to wake anyone. Every now and then, we would have several people all buzz within 2 minutes of each other, asking us to tell the children to stop running around and playing outside, and asked why they were up so late and where their parents were. This was only on one side of the building. Several other staff members believed it to be haunted as well.